sequitur, though. That doesn't logically follow.
No, I'm not saying it's because
Well,
he's cool or because I like some of his features. I'm saying he's the absolute God that certainly exists, that rules over heaven and earth. And in a situation where
okay.
his rule is inescapable, it's quite foolish to try to disobey him by advocating for the murder of the unborn or the murder of the born in the case of your position on, people being able to neglect their children to death.
Well, now you're saying um, it's foolish not to obey God. Not necessarily that his standards aren't still subjective, dependent upon himself.
Well,
What I'm
he's
asking for is if you can give me an objective reason why I ought to obey God's prescriptions.
Yeah, because he exists, and because if you don't obey his prescriptions, you're sinning. And then if you don't turn to Christ for forgiveness and seek out his grace, then you'll be cast into hell. I'd say that's a pretty good reason to obey God.
Hayden Rodia, based Christian Hayden Rodia, absolutely schools this young pro-choicer over here on the topic of pregnancy termination. Now, obviously, Hayden Rodia is pro-life, and this other confused person right here thinks it's all right to unalive an unborn child, and so therefore, Hayden Rodia has to try to talk some sense into this young man. Let's see how this debate goes down.
Have the right to stop giving their resources to other human beings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do mothers and fathers have the choice to stop giving resources to their children after their children are born?
They do in certain circumstances, right? I think the main difference here, Hayden, is going to be that uh, outside of birth, when parents decide they want to raise a child, they're sort of entering into a social contract, right? That stipulates they are going to provide care to that child. And when they decide not to, which they do have that right, there are certain methods they have to go through to end that responsibility, to relinquish that responsibility onto another party. Whereas a pregnant woman, I don't think she does enter into that social contract by becoming pregnant.
Mm-hmm. And so when parents have like a child who's been born, right? It sounds like you're correct. Once again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misunderstanding you, but it sounds like you're saying that parents of a born child have the option of essentially adoption or putting the child in foster care rather than taking care of the child, and you think that that's acceptable?
Um, you cut out a little bit for me there, but yeah, I don't think anyone who gives birth to a child is intrinsically obligated to take care of that child. I think they can give it up to adoption, for example. I don't think the biological connection between the parent and the child is sufficient enough for an intrinsic obligation there.
So, do you believe in neglect laws? Like if a mother or father leaves their child alone in the house and the child dies because parents haven't fed the child or anything, do you think that that should be against the law? That like if a mother like just leaves her child in the closet for 10 days and the child dies, mother should be charged with murder?
Yes, for sure. But that's still going to be different from abortion because this is someone who is specifically taking a child who is under their care and restricting them from resources from other people. When you're pregnant, there are no other parties that can provide resources to that child. So you're not restricting the child from resources. Whereas if you kept a child in your closet, you're essentially kidnapping that child. You're saying, I'm no longer its parent. I'm not legally taking care of it, but I'm going to keep it in my care. That's kidnapping and forestalling care from the child, which I would say is a crime there.
So I got a couple questions about this person right here that Hayden's debating. First of all, is this the 14-year-old boy Hayden's debating, or is this a trans man? What's going on here? Who is this kid? Is looks like Andy Milanakis. Back to the topic at hand, though. That actually has happened, though, where and it's horrific, by the way, absolutely horrific. Like I don't know what kind of monsters would do this, but where mothers like will leave their infants like up to 1 years old, they will leave them alone and go vacation. They return home from their vacation and the child is dead. And correctly, I think anybody would say, yeah, that's clearly murder, and that's clearly murder from neglect. And so this person right here, I don't know if they've ever heard about stories like that, but that's not necessarily kidnapping, that's just neglect. Now, yeah, I mean, true, they have the option. They have the option to leave the child with a relative or a babysitter or just anybody, but they instead choose to just let their child die. And that's pretty much I think that's the same as murder, because you are choosing to, rather than find care for the child, you're instead choosing to just let the child die. And how is that any different than a mother who has a life in the womb choosing to snuff out that life in the womb?
Okay, so I guess I think I kind of see where you're going with this. So, for example, like let's say like it sounds like you're saying like in the case of pregnancy, it's unique because in that situation, the mother is the only one who can provide the resources. Correct?
It's unique because there are no other parties for which the pregnant person is restricting resources from. If you're keeping a child in your house away from everyone else and not notifying anyone that it's there and you're not taking care of it, you are restricting that child from resources from other people. That's the issue there. Whereas in pregnancy, obviously you can't be doing that because there are no other parties who could provide resources to sustain that fetus.
Gotcha. Okay, so I've got kind of a hypothetical that I'm curious to hear your answer on. So let's say that a
For
mother
sure.
is pregnant and she's in a cabin in like let's just say like Wyoming, and there's a massive snowstorm that causes her to be stuck inside of the cabin, right? And then she gives birth to the child. And because of the snowstorm, they can't get other resources into the cabin. So she's stuck with the child, this newborn child, for 7 days. And there's, she can breastfeed the child, or she can say, this child has no right to use my body and this child can die because I'm not going to breastfeed it. So let's say that the woman decides, you know what, this child has no right to use my body. I'm not going to breastfeed the child. And then 7 days later, when the snow melts and the cops come and they see, okay, now there's this dead newborn. And this mother decided intentionally not to feed the child, not to breastfeed. And now this child is dead. Do you think that that mother did anything wrong? Should she be charged with murder or neglect or anything? Because at that time, she was the only person who could have provided those resources.
Yeah, so I think when you consent to being a parent, when you take your child home from the hospital, for example, or sign the birth certificate, and you agree to that obligation, you are obligated via that social contract to take care of the child until you can relinquish it onto another party, right? The difference is with pregnancy that nowhere along the line of getting pregnant did the pregnant woman consent to that obligation. So this woman in the snowstorm, assuming she went there with that child, it is her child. She is obligated to take care of it because she agreed to that obligation already until she can relinquish it. That's
Okay,
going to
so
be the
just to clarify,
distinction there.
you do think that the woman in the snowstorm then should be charged with murder if she doesn't breastfeed the child?
Yeah, maybe not murder specifically. That's more of a legal question, but some sort of neglect for sure.
One of the things that irritate me to no end is the argument about, well, the woman didn't consent to get pregnant. Um, yeah, in a way they did. I mean, they didn't consent to, maybe they didn't outright saying, yeah, I'm okay with getting pregnant. But when you have intercourse, there's a possibility that you're going to get pregnant. It's a possibility. Much like in the same way, like I'm sure women don't consent to STDs, knowing that that's a possible outcome when you make decisions like going out and having sex. Like, it's not an excuse.
So you're saying that in the absence of alternatives, mothers are required to use their body to support their child, correct?
No, I'm more so saying that when you agree to take care of a child, regardless if you're the mother, father, not even biological relation, you have to take care of that child until you can relinquish them onto another party. Whereas a pregnant woman never agreed to that responsibility in the first place, so she has no such obligation. If you want, Hayden, I can maybe make your hypothetical a little more intriguing. Let's say the woman instead had a cryptic pregnancy where she went out to that cabin in the woods. She had a child, and she was unaware that she was pregnant. So now she didn't ever agree to this responsibility, but she's with a child somehow. In that scenario, no, I wouldn't say we're justified in making her take care of that child. I think that would be slavery, forced labor. I think I'm against that,
So
obviously.
you're now going beyond being okay with killing children in the womb. You're now okay with mothers of newborns intentionally starving them to death.
No, I'm saying if you did not consent to the responsibility of taking care of a child, I'm not going to force you to. I mean, do you think, Hayden,
Yeah,
we should
yeah. So
be
you're
forcing?
well. Hang on. So you're okay
Go
with
ahead.
the mother in the snowstorm who didn't realize she was pregnant, gives birth, then starving the child to death by saying this child has
I'm
no right
not.
to use my body. That's what you just said.
No, I'm not okay with it. I think it's terrible. But just like I think not donating to charity is terrible, we don't have any right to force people to just take care of children. That would be slavery. Don't you agree?
That's the basis of all neglect laws: is that parents are morally obligated to care for their children.
I disagree. I think you are not obligated to someone unless you consent to. Hayden, can we agree that it's slavery if you're forcing people to take care of children against their will?
I don't.
This dude is all about this, whatever it is, this 13-year-old boy, is all about consent. Oh, consent. Okay, well, the unborn baby didn't consent to be born. It ain't never consented to exist. Like not everything is about not everything is about consent. Some things are just about duties. And if this was really just all about consent, then you could just make the argument, well, the little baby didn't consent to being born. He didn't consent to being alive. It didn't consent to being created. It also doesn't consent to being unalive.
Slavery now.
Okay, well, can you just define slavery for me real quick?
Sure. Slavery would be forced labor against your will.
Okay, so if we are forcing someone to take care of a child, would that be labor?
Forcing someone to take care of a child. I don't think that forcing parents to take care of their children is forced labor. I don't think it's slavery. No, I think
Okay,
I think comparing actual slavery, like happened in chattel slavery in the 1800s, to parents having to care for their child. No, I don't think that that's comparable at all.
okay, but to be fair, Hayden, I think you're dodging my question. Do you think taking care of a child is labor?
Not when it's the parents. I don't think it's forced labor when it's the parents.
Okay, well, can you tell me what labor is then? Because now I'm confused.
Well, I'm fully acknowledging that there's something unique about a parent-child relationship that doesn't exist. For example, me. I shouldn't be, forced to care for someone else's child, but I'm not the parent of the child. If it's my child, that's a unique situation in which I should be forced to care for the child. See, what you're denying is that there's something unique about a parent-child relationship.
I understand you have that position. I just want you to acknowledge you are indeed forcing labor onto people because they have a biological child.
I disagree that parenthood is labor. That's the point that I'm disagreeing with you on.
Well, then I want you to tell me what the difference is between this and.
Well, yeah, also, too, we're not kidnapping women off the street and forcing them to take care of children. No, we're telling women that they need to take responsibility for the choices that they make, at least in the cases of consensual sex. So if you go out and you have consensual sex, you can't say, well, I only consented to the sex, but not the pregnancy. It doesn't work like that. That'd be like if I went and, let's say I decided to go out drinking, right? And then I went and I drove and then I got in a car accident and I was like, well, I consented to drinking and I consented to driving my car, but I didn't consent to crashing it. Like, that's not how that's not how it works. Like, these are
like what makes parenthood not labor?
Yeah, that it's your child. I'm not. If I was forced to care for someone else's child at the point of a gun, right, or at the point of a bayonet, right? Like, for example, if I was a woman in the 1800s who was enslaved and I was forced to take care of the white plantation owner's child at the threat of death, then yeah, that's slavery. But if I have sex, get someone pregnant, they have a child, and then I care for that child, that's not forced labor. That's called parenthood.
Well, you can call it that, but by definition is what I'm asking for you to acknowledge, that by definition, taking care of a child is labor. It is work, and you are forcing them to do it under threat of punishment. So by definition, that is slavery. Yes, it's not chattel slavery. There are other types of slavery that we find more abhorrent.
So you
I
think
just want you to acknowledge by definition it is slavery.
that it's forced labor? It's not slavery. It's called parenthood. There's something unique about a parent-child relationship.
Okay.
Based on
Well,
real quick, based on your claim, I'm assuming you want to abolish all neglect laws.
No, like I said,
Why not?
in 99, because you consented to that responsibility. Again, people who are pregnant did not consent to that obligation.
When did they consent?
When you sign the birth certificate, when you go home from the hospital with the child,
That
there
birth
are
certificate's
ways
more
we
important
can
than I
tell you.
thought.
It's not the only way. There are ways we can implicitly show that we are consenting to that obligation.
Do you think
But
that?
but
So
yes.
just real quick, I want to point something out. You've gone now, you've, and I hope you're willing. I mean, you've gone now further than saying it's okay to splice up children in the womb through abortion. I mean, you've said that a woman who's in the snowstorm can starve her newborn to death. So you're beyond abortion. You're okay with parents killing their newborns.
Okay. No, I'm not okay with parents killing their newborns. I'm okay with a woman who has been pregnant against her knowledge and who winds up in a snowstorm, this extremely rare scenario.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
okay
okay
with
with her
saying
allowing her
yes.
child to die.
Hayden, well, let me finish, Hayden.
Okay.
Um, I'm saying we don't have a right to force her to do servitude against her will. We don't have a right to force her to do labor. I'm against slavery. And you're obviously uncomfortable with calling forced labor slavery. So
Parenthood.
I think,
I'm uncomfortable with calling parenthood slavery because it's not.
well, yeah, you don't want to, but do you agree parenthood is labor?
No, because it's a
Okay,
special
so can you just
relationship between a parent and a child.
what is labor, Hayden? What is labor?
What here? You want me to look up the exact definition?
Whatever you need to
According,
do, I just want you
okay,
to
I mean,
explain why taking care of a child would not be labor.
well, sure. You may even you may say it's labor, but I mean, I'd point out it's labor that is parental. I mean, you're basically labeling all parenthood
Okay.
as labor. Which, if you want to do that, you can. But I mean, if you're going to do that, you have to be against all neglect laws. Otherwise, you're being completely inconsistent. If you're saying that we have no right to force labor, and you're saying parenthood is labor, you have to be in support of abolishing all neglect laws and being perfectly fine with parents starving their 3-year-olds to death by saying they don't
Again,
have a right to use my body.
no, because in most cases, these parents have already agreed to that responsibility. So it's a contractual obligation. It's not neglect. Um, Here, how about this, Hayden? Outside of parenthood, can you give me one other scenario in which I would be required to give my resources to someone else and I haven't entered into a contract with them and I haven't violated their rights in any way? Just one other scenario.
Yeah, if you go push a newborn child into a pool, you're required to use your body to take them out of the pool.
Okay, nope, nope, because that would be assaulting them. I'm pushing a child, so that's a rights violation. So I asked you to give me a scenario without a rights violation and without a contract.
Yeah, I believe that if there is a newborn drowning in the pool and someone can just reach down and take them out of the pool, they are morally obligated to do that. I believe in good Samaritan laws.
Okay, so you think they are legally obligated to?
I think they should be. Not I don't know whether they are now, but I think that if someone sees like a
Well,
newborn
yeah,
fall
should be
into the
legally
pool,
obligated.
they should be legally obligated to go pull the child out of the pool because
Okay,
it's
so
very
so
easy to
what
do.
to what extent am I legally obligated to help other people? Like, let's say there's a child who needs my kidney, Hayden. Do you think I should be obligated to give my kidney to that child?
Well, that's not analogous to abortion.
I'm not talking about abortion right now. I'm just talking about this principle you have where you think we're obligated just to help other people just because it sounds like. So if there's a
Within
child
certain
who needs my
degrees.
kidney, okay, so what, yeah, how do we just, what are the degrees? How do we discover that?
Yeah, so the degrees would come from the law of God, the Bible. My question to you really is just: it sounds like you're not a Christian, so why are you even arguing for any legislation?
Well, I want the government to operate a certain way. But Hayden, before we get into that
Mm-hmm.
discussion, how would the law of God help us decide whether or not we should be obligated to give our kidney to another child?
Yeah, so for one, I would say that I don't think that people should be forced to give their kidneys to a random child, but that's not analogous to abortion.
Well, yeah,
Okay,
we're not
so
saying like I'm not saying they're going to be strapped down and forced to give their kidney, but in the same way you would think someone who didn't save a child that was drowning should be punished, I'm assuming, right?
yeah, if you see like a 12-month-old child fall into like a swimming pool and they're just like at the water's edge and you can reach down and save them, and instead you choose to just watch them
Okay.
drown, I do think they should be punished. That's based on
So
good
if there's
Samaritan
a
laws from the
yeah,
Bible.
if there's a child who needs my kidney and I neglect to give them my kidney and they die, should I be charged with a crime there?
No, so it's a different in terms of the extent, right? So there are degrees of good Samaritan laws, right? So that would be the basis. And we have Bible studies
Okay,
from time to
so
time where we study those things.
Yeah, also too, yeah, I mean it's a little bit more sadistic if a toddler or just a young child falls into the pool and you could save them but you just choose not to. That's a little evil. You're making a choice right there. Same thing with the kidney, but the bottom line is that um If you don't want to donate your kidney, there are other people that I'm sure would want to donate their kidney. So it goes with the same logic that Andy Milonakis over here was trying to employ. It's like, well, you don't necessarily have a duty to, like, even if a parent doesn't want to take care of their child anymore, well, they could just give them up for adoption. They have a choice. They could put them up for adoption or the foster care system or something like that, and let someone else handle the responsibility. But with the child in the womb, you can't do that. I mean, even Andy Milonakis over here conceded that point earlier. So even by his own standards, the kidney situation and the kidney situation is not even analogous to pregnancy.
What's the threshold here?
Yeah, like I said, we have Bible studies from time to time where we would dive into God's word and try to figure out what exactly the threshold is and then implement that in law. Now, my
Do you
question
know
to
what the
you,
threshold is offhand, or are you're not
well,
sure?
I'd probably want to take a look at the Bible, see exactly, what the threshold would be for the Good Samaritan laws. But again, I'd point out that there's a special, unique relationship between the parent and child that I think you're completely neglecting, because you've either got to take the position where you want to abolish all neglect laws, or you've got to say that parents are required to use their bodies to support their children.
Okay, so again, I think you keep misinterpreting me here, Hayden. I'm saying that in the case where parents agree to take care of a child, they now have an obligation to that child until
Yeah,
they
but
can
what if they
relinquish
don't?
them.
What if they don't ever agree to it? What if they have a newborn? They say, "I don't want this newborn." They don't agree to it. They don't sign the birth certificate like you
Okay.
said. They say, "I don't want this
Okay.
child," and then they just let the child die. In your view, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, no, no. There is. So give me a scenario where this would happen, and I can tell you why it's wrong.
Yeah, the snowstorm.
Okay, so beyond the snowstorm.
Well, answer the snowstorm one. You said to give me an example. I just did.
Well,
The
I already
snowstorm.
answered that one,
Yeah, and you
but
said it was
Hayden, we
perfect.
gotta.
Yeah, and well, hang on. You
Hayden,
answered it, and you said it was perfectly fine for the infant newborn child to die. So you answered it, and you
I
justified
didn't say it
infanticide.
was.
You said
Hayden,
it should be legal. It should
I
be
think the
legal.
reason
You
yeah,
said
it
it
should
should
be
be legal.
legal, right?
Yes.
Just
You
like
said it should be legal.
I don't think it's perfectly fine to let a child who needs your kidney die, right, Hayden? But do you think that should be legal?
I'm sorry. Can you say that again? I didn't hear you.
I don't think it's fine, for example, to let a child who needs your kidney to die, right? Just not give them your kidney. Do you think it's fine?
Do I think that it's okay? I think that if it's just a complete, like, say there's someone in India right now, right, who if they had my kidney they would live. I think it's acceptable for me to say that I wouldn't give my kidney to that person.
Well, let's
Now
say
I
they're
think oh,
not.
hang on, let me finish. I think that
Sorry,
people
go
should
ahead.
do that. I think people should do that, but I don't think it should be a law. Okay, because I think that we should love
Okay.
our neighbors as ourselves. So I think that people should do that, but I don't think it should be law. But that's not analogous to abortion, because there
Well,
is something. Go ahead.
what if it's a person who's like in your neighborhood who needs your kidney, a child in your neighborhood?
People should give the kidney, but there's a difference between a sin and a crime, right? Because we should love our neighbor as ourselves. So people should give their kidney to the other person, but that's different from a crime. That I think people should do that, but I don't think it should be. Say that again. I didn't hear you.
I don't think it's fine, for example, to let a child who needs your kidney to die, right? Just not give them your kidney. Do you think it's fine?
Do I think that it's okay? I think that if it's just a complete, like, say there's someone in India right now, right, who if they had my kidney they would live. I think it's acceptable for me to say that I wouldn't give my kidney to that person.
Well, let's
Now
say
I
they're
think oh,
not.
hang on, let me finish. I think that
Sorry,
people
go
should
ahead.
do that. I think people should do that, but I don't think it should be a law. Okay, because I think that we should love
Okay.
our neighbors as ourselves. So I think that people should do that, but I don't think it should be law. But that's not analogous to abortion, because there
Well,
is something. Go ahead.
what if it's a person who's like in your neighborhood who needs your kidney, a child in your neighborhood?
Yeah, like I said, I think that people should give the kidney, but there's a difference between a sin and a crime, right? Because we should love our neighbor as ourselves. So people should give their kidney to the other person, but that's different from a crime, because the way that
Exactly.
someone, hang on,
That's
let me finish.
Go
Okay,
ahead. Go ahead.
what someone's dying from in that situation is whatever illness or whatever defect is causing them to need that kidney transplant. That's different from me going and stabbing them. If I go stab them, I go starve them to death or do anything like that, that's intentionally murdering them, and I should be charged with murder. That's different from abortion. Okay, abortion, you have someone ripping someone apart limb by limb or intentionally starving them to death with a pill. So that's intentional murder.
Okay, so similar to how you think it's someone they should give their kidney to someone who needs it. I think this woman in the cabin should take care of the child. And just like you think, although they should, we shouldn't be obligated, we shouldn't, legally obligate them. The same is true for this woman in the cabin. I don't think legally she would be obligated to do so because I think we should not force people to do labor against their will.
Should parents be
So,
legally should parents legally be obligated to take care of their 10-year-olds?
yes, I would imagine so.
Why? What if they revoke their consent and they say, I no longer consent to caring for this child, and I'm not going to use my body to support it and let it die?
Well, yeah, they can give their child up for adoption.
That's using their body. They have to make a call. They have to call the cops. They have to call someone to give that child. Why should they use their body to support another individual? Your position is they can just revoke consent.
Yeah, you can revoke consent, but you can't just allow a child to starve under your care. If it is able for them, if it is possible for them to receive care from other parties, and you restrict that, then you're committing an additional crime.
Yeah, but just real quick, I mean, in your view, if it's not possible and you're the only party that can support the child, your view is it's okay for them to die. I mean, you already said in the snowstorm thing that it should be fine for the newborn to be able to die.
Not if you previously agreed to be the parent of the child. So So yes, in this very, very rare scenario where this woman did not ever agree to the child, she got pregnant under circumstances in which she was unaware, and she was unaware she was pregnant, and she somehow ended up in this cabin. Yes, in this scenario, it's very dire, and I would say, although it's extremely unfortunate, and I think she should do her best to take care of that child, I have no legal basis to force her to. So while I think it's tragic, just like you think it's tragic for someone not to give their kidney to someone who needs it, yeah, I acknowledge in this circumstance, I don't have any justification to force her to take care of that child. But Hayden, I wanted to ask you about your religious views for a second. Do you think there should be a separation of church and state?
Great question. So I think there should be a separation of church and state, not a separation of God and state, and not a separation of God and morality.
Well, do you think it's a sin to lie?
Yes.
Do you think all sins are equal besides blasphemy?
No, I don't believe that all sins are equal. I believe that all sin separates us from God, but not all sins should be punished equally.
Why not?
Because that's what the Bible says.
Can you tell me where it says that in the Bible?
Yes.
I'm just genuinely curious.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if you look at Exodus, I believe it's Exodus 21 or 22 that goes through essentially the different punishments for different crimes in the Old Testament. So for example, if I go murder someone, I deserve the death penalty. But if I go steal $2 from someone, I don't get the death penalty. So there's a difference as far as how crimes should be punished depending on the crime.
And if the Bible says that we should be allowed to do something, like when the Bible says we should be allowed to own slaves, do you think we should be allowed to own slaves now?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. The slavery. That is one of their go-tos when they're debating Christians. It's always, oh, what about slavery? It's a slavery in the Bible. I wonder if he got that from his computer screen right there. If he was Googling, what's some good arguments right there? Yeah, notice these people always have to use external sources when debating. Like, there's a difference between pulling up a source, like if they ask, can you show me that source, or can I see the article, or can I see the study, than actively trying to search up, like, possible arguments while you're in a debate.
Well, so it's important to really make a distinction as far as indentured servitude in the Bible and the chattel slavery of like the 1800s. So like if you look at the Bible system of indentured servitude, for one thing, I can't go kidnap someone and enslave someone. In fact, if someone does that, they would be given the death penalty according to Old Testament law. So like the chattel slave traders of like the 1800s should have been given the death penalty. And that's why abolitionists stood on the law word of God and said that slavery needed to be abolished. Now, one question that I would have for you is what's your opposition to slavery? If you believe that over us is only sky, that we're the descendants of bacteria, you have no ultimate objection to anyone enslaving other people.
Well, yeah, I'll answer that. First, I wanted to question this indentured servitude, though. If I wanted to, for example, buy a slave from a neighboring nation and then own them for life, you wouldn't allow me to do that today?
If you wanted to buy a slave from a neighboring nation,
yeah, like the Bible in Leviticus. Here, let me look up the verse. Actually, we can be accurate here. Leviticus.
Well, I guess I'm kind of curious how this is relating to abortion.
Yeah, I'm questioning right now. I'm challenging this idea that the Bible or God's morality is really a good standard for us to
Yeah, so I guess
use.
I can kind of honestly like take a speed run so this doesn't get derailed and just tell you my position on this. So I believe that God is the standard of morality. Without him, you can't have any morality. I'm happy to defend, the law word of God from Old Testament to New. I think there are some things in the Old Testament that God regulates, even though he hates. One example being divorce, another example being slavery. I think that when we look at the Bible, we need to take it from Old Testament to New. I'm not going to sit here and apologize for the things of the Old Testament, including things that modern atheists find grotesque. My point, as far as just let me finish, as far as things with slavery and things like that, I don't have any objection to the indentured servitude from the Old Testament, and neither do atheists, because I have no objection, because God is the standard of goodness. He sets the terms of morality, and his law is perfect and just, and you don't have any objection to slavery because above the slaves is only sky. There's no ultimate standard of justice, and they're just the descendants of bacteria.
Well, your characterization of indentured servitude, I want to challenge real quick for a second. So I'm reading Leviticus chapter 25, starting at verse 44. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born into your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children after you to inherit as their property, and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So would you have any contention then with someone buying a slave from another nation and owning them as property for life?
So a couple of things. First of all, as far as like, you didn't let me answer. According to like Leviticus 25, right, all these other parts of the Old Testament that, in modern day seem weird or seem odd, what I would do is I would take a look at what, pastors and people who have done the exegesis say about these things. And, whatever they say, I'm willing to swallow full, all the way down, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that God's wrong or that God's immoral at all. Now, as far as Old Testament law and how that relates to New Testament, we have to take a look at the full context and the full Bible. Right now, what you're doing is you're trying to sort of cherry pick verses instead of looking at the full system. Now, like I said, and I mentioned this earlier, there are some things in the Old Testament that God regulates, even though he hates. Two examples being divorce and another example being slavery. Now, that being said, I want to ask you, what's your problem with slavery? In the atheistic worldview, you don't have a problem with slavery.
Yeah, I do. I can't, like slavery goes against my conscience. I can't abide by slavery. I think owning someone as property is a violation of their rights. They have a right not to be owned as property. And that's a system I think we should uphold.
Says
but
who?
you kind of says me. But
slaveholders
I don't think you really.
The slave traders aren't you. Why should they obey what your preference is?
I think it's the most consistent preference to have. I mean, I would debate these slaveholders and ask them why they think they can own slaves. But Hayden,
well, hang on. I'm not going to hang on. I let you.
But you didn't answer my question, Hayden.
Sir,
you did not answer my question. Hold on. Let me just finish real quick.
Sir. I've answered a few of your questions. You need to ultimately justify me, given your premises as an atheist, where we're the descendants of stardust, the descendants of bacteria, why it's okay to eat plants and eat animals, which are made of matter, just like human beings, but why it's wrong to enslave other human beings. Given your worldview, they are both matter. Mm-hmm. What is wrong with abusing some forms of matter and not abusing other forms of matter? Why are you arbitrarily saying that human beings have value, dignity, and deserve respect, but not grass, not rocks, and not animals?
Yeah, Hayden, I'm going to acknowledge that it is ultimately stemming from my own empathy. It is subjective. I'm not going to deny that.
So it's subjective. But, so you have no ultimate argument against slavery because the slave traders and the slaveholders don't agree with you. It's subjective.
Well, I have plenty of arguments. But Hayden, you said God regulates divorce and slavery, but you think divorce should be legal, I'm assuming, correct?
Not no-fault divorce. So like I said, I think you're missing a distinction here. I said in the Old Testament, God regulated certain things that he hates, including divorce and slavery. Now, I don't believe in no-fault divorce in any way. That being said, do I believe that people should be able to get divorced for things like adultery? Yes. Do I believe that God hates it when people get divorced? Yes.
Well, I don't see any evidence in the Bible that God hates owning another person as property insofar as they're not Israelite. Can you give me evidence of that?
Yeah, the fact that kidnapping and enslaving someone is a capital crime worthy of the death penalty in the Old Testament.
Are you?
Which is what happened during the 1800s with chattel slavery. What's your problem with chattel slavery?
Are you sure they're not referring to specifically Israelites when they say that?
Yeah, look up kidnapping and enslaving, capital crime, Old Testament. You'll find the verse. What's your problem with chattel slavery?
Do you think owning someone as property is enslaving them?
Do I think that owning someone as property is enslaving them? Yes.
Okay, so would it not be a contradiction then for God to say in Leviticus you may own someone as property, and then also say you cannot own someone as property?
Again, I'll repeat this. I think this is about the third or fourth time I've said this. There are certain things in the Old Testament that God regulates, even though he hates them, two of them being divorce and slavery. Now, I've pointed out my objection to the chattel slavery of the 1800s, which I'll point out is different than the Hebrew slavery of the Old Testament. Now, with the chattel slavery, specifically of the 1800s, abolitionists, who are Christians, primarily, by the vast majority, stood on the law word of God. They said kidnapping and enslaving someone is worthy of the death penalty. It's a capital crime in the Old Testament. Therefore, this chattel slave trade needs to be abolished. Slavery needs to be abolished. Now, abolitionists were able to do that because they had an absolute standard of morality they could appeal to. What is your problem with people kidnapping slaves from Africa and then enslaving them on the basis of race, taking their descendants, kidnapping them and enslaving them as well? What is your problem with that, given the atheistic worldview?
Well,
all you have is your
said,
preference, but your preference isn't binding on them.
Well, is God's morality his preference?
Is God's morality his preference? No,
Yeah.
because when you say that it's his preference, the way that you're trying to phrase it, you're trying to make it sound like it's as arbitrary as my preference or your preference, but it's not. God is the ultimate standard.
Okay, how is it not arbitrary?
Because God is the ultimate standard. Things that are arbitrary.
What does that mean?
What do you mean? That he's the ultimate standard?
Yeah, why can't I just say I'm the ultimate standard? What's going to be the distinction between us?
Because you're not God.
Okay, so what makes God the ultimate standard?
The fact that he's God. There is nothing beyond him. There was nothing before him, nor shall there be any after him.
So what makes it any less subjective simply because God has existed longer than me?
Because he's all powerful. He created you. He sustains the universe. Can you sustain the universe? I think not. Are you the ultimate standard of morality? Can you cast people into hell or provide mercy and grace on them? No.
What you're saying essentially is that God is very, very cool. I like all these things he can do. So therefore, he's the ultimate standard.
No, dummy. He's saying that he's God, that he's the ultimate. He's the supreme. There's nothing beyond God. It's God. He created everything. It's not just, oh, I think God is rad, bro. No, there is no supreme being or entity beyond God. It's God. God is the final word.
It's not really, that's a non sequitur, though. That doesn't logically follow.
No, I'm not saying it's because he's cool or because I like some of his features. I'm saying he's the absolute God that certainly exists, that rules over heaven and earth. And in a situation where his rule is inescapable, it's quite foolish to try to disobey him by advocating for the murder of the unborn or the murder of the born in the case of your position on, people being able to neglect their children to death.
Well, now you're saying it's foolish not to obey God, not necessarily that his standards aren't still subjective, dependent upon himself. What I'm asking for is if you can give me an objective reason why I ought to obey God's prescriptions.
Yeah, because he exists, and because if you don't obey his prescriptions, you're sinning, and then if you don't turn to Christ for forgiveness and seek out his grace, then you'll be cast into hell. I'd say that's a pretty good reason to obey God.
Well, it might be a good reason to you, but objectively, why ought I care about those facts?
Yeah, because objectively God exists. And if you don't care about those facts, if you don't care about God's law, his standards of justice, your sin, and your chance at salvation, if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, which I'll assure you, if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you repent of your sins. He's a gracious God and he's willing to offer mercy. And if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you'll go to heaven. But if you don't, you will go to hell. That's the reason why you should obey God.
But Hayden, you're still more so just appealing to my desire not to be punished. You're saying, well, if you don't want to be punished in hell, you should obey God's prescriptions. This is still not an objective reason. It's going to depend upon my own subjective will not to be punished. If there's a person who doesn't care about going to hell, they don't care about disagreeing with God, how can you justify God's prescriptions being objective to them?
Yeah, so I think there's a really good point you're making. And one way that I would sort of seek to help you visualize this is if we were to enter into a debate, and the debate was, should we obey gravity? Well, we'd have to think about, is this a debate that's even worth entering into? Because the only way we enter into this debate is if we give way to some absurdity and some chaos. And in the same way, because it's foolish to debate gravity when gravity is inescapable, it's also foolish to debate, should we obey God or not obey God when God is inescapable? It's a foolish question that reduces things to chaos.
But gravity is not a prescription. Gravity is a description, so you can't obey gravity.
Bottom line is you do you, man. Like if you don't want to if you don't want to submit to God and you want to ask God for forgiveness and such, well, that's on you. Like you don't, if you don't care about going to hell, then you don't care about going to hell. It's the same thing like with man-made laws. Okay, there are man-made laws, and if you don't follow these man-made laws, um, depending on the law, let's just go with murder. Okay, committing murder. If you commit murder, you go to prison and you serve and you could potentially serve the rest of your life in prison. I could come here and make that argument and say, well, that you're not giving me an argument of why I shouldn't commit murder. What if some people don't care about going to prison? What if some people just don't care about other human lives and they don't care if they go to prison? Yeah, all right, whatever, man. Like, if you don't think human life is valuable and if you don't care about going to prison, then okay, fine. It's not going to be me rotting in a jail cell. Same thing, like it's not going to be me rotting in hell. Maybe that's a bad Christian of me. I should be doing more to save people. But if you can't convince people that, let's say unaliving people is morally wrong, and if you say, yeah, but listen, if you don't, this is going to happen. And if they don't care about that, I don't know. What else are you supposed to do? I guess I could pray for these people. Maybe I'll do that.
That's a category error you're making there, Hayden. When it comes to prescriptions, I think they're ultimately going to be subjective. They're dependent upon the existence of a subject. You said yourself, God exists. God is a subject.
He certainly exists.
If God didn't exist, would these moral rules exist?
If God didn't exist, so for example, if you take the atheistic worldview, then morality is not a meaningful term because all you have is individual preferences, which minimize to nihilism and despair.
Well, I think God's preferences are also individual. He's an individual as well. And you didn't answer my question.
Us.
Yes,
God
yes
is not
or no?
like us. Well, hang on. There's a category error here. You're trying to make God like us. He's not. He's the one who created us. He's the one who sustains the universe. He's the one who died, was resurrected 3 days later to pay the price for our sins. He walked among us. He's not us. His standards aren't arbitrary.
Yeah, I'm not saying God isn't a human. I'm saying God is an individual. He is still a subject. He's still a person.
Well,
correct?
Well, I mean, what do you mean by that? You're essentially trying to frame him as
he has a.
What does that even mean? Yeah, well, I'm not saying he's a human, but he's a person. Well, what? We're like, this is so ridiculous.
He has a mind. He has a mind, correct?
Well, not like us. So God technically exists in
I'm
spirit.
not saying he has a mind like us. Like Hayden, I'm sorry, a rat has a mind, right? I'm not saying he's like us. I'm just saying he does have a mind, correct?
I mean, in the Bible, it does describe sort of the mind of God in a way, but it's not like us. He exists in spirit. We don't exist in. I mean, we have
fine.
a soul.
He doesn't have to be like us. But what I'm saying is that his prescriptions are obviously still dependent upon himself. If he did not exist, neither would his prescriptions. Correct.
Correct. If God did not exist, then
okay.
Obviously.
So by definition, then God's prescriptions are going to be dependent upon his existence, making them subjective.
No, it does not therefore follow. See, what you're assuming is that you're basically outlawing the objective standards at the outset. You're saying that there can be no objective standards of morality at the outset.
Correct. I'm saying that is a incoherent term.
Yeah, but if God does exist, then whatever his standards are for morality are objective because he's eternal, unchanging, and he is the standard for morality. And you can't account for morality apart from him. All that you have are individual preferences.
Well, I can account for preferences just like I can account for God's preferences. Yes, God has preferences. I have preferences. You have preferences.
That's a category error, though, again, because you're assuming that God's preferences are the same as sort of our preferences. But there's there's a massive difference, though, in terms of mine and your preferences and God's preferences. And the fact that me and you are not God. God is God. He sets the standards. We don't.
But Hayden, I think what you're doing is you're conflating the unreasonability. Like, so let's assume God exists. And obviously, because God is omniscient, omnipotent, he's existed forever. His prescriptions obviously would be very meaningful to us. They should be, right? What I'm saying, though, is that you still are not able ultimately to bridge that gap to say someone is objectively obligated to obey those prescriptions. You can say, yes, it would be very stupid for them to do so. I agree with you. But that's still not going to equivalent to them being objectively obligated to obey them.
Well, let me ask you this: Are we
Go
objectively
ahead.
are we objectively obligated to obey United States law?
No.
No. Okay. Why is that?
Uh, because I don't think you have an objective obligation for any prescription. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay. So in a
Because
world
any
where
prescription is ultimately going to be dependent upon the existence of at least one subject.
let me ask you this: you said that we're correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying we're not objectively required to obey God's law, correct?
I wouldn't see any reason we would be.
Okay.
That's what
So
I've tried to get from you.
yeah. So here's the reason that we're objectively required to obey God's law, because it's inescapable.
Again, that's not going to be objective. Like, for example,
It
Hayden,
is
if I
objective.
trapped you, if I
Hang on, just,
trapped
just real
you,
quick. I think
go
that your
ahead, go ahead.
perspective, I think your perspective on if it's objective that we ought to obey God's law, I think it's about 80 years premature.
So, Hayden, do you think if I trapped you in my basement and there was no way for you to escape, and I told you you have to eat one Oreo every day, or I'm going to whip you, do you think you're objectively obligated to eat that Oreo every day?
Well, I think that you putting me in your basement and essentially, enslaving me to eat Oreos is not analogous to God creating me, sustaining me, blessing me with everything around me, allowing me the chance to glorify Him and to be grateful for all the many blessings that He's given to me and given to you. Part of your problem here is that you're ungrateful for everything that God has given to you. And in Romans 1, it says that people who suppress the truth about God, not only does He hand them over to their wicked desires, but they also refuse to give thanks, even though it's self-evident that God is the one who has created us, sustained us, and blessed us. We refuse to give thanks to Him, and instead He hands over unbelievers to their sin. And I think that's really on display here, because you're essentially comparing God to this monster rather than the one who has blessed us and sustains us.
Hayden, I don't. We've been doing hypotheticals and analogies this whole debate, but for some reason now you're deciding to ignore the principle I'm talking about here and instead debate over the descriptive differences. Yes, obviously I'm not God, but the in this case I'm giving you the punishment for you not eating an Oreo every day is as inescapable as you think going to hell is if you're a sinner and reject God, right? That's what I'm asking here. So
Mm-hmm.
if it's true that the consequence of you not eating an Oreo, which is being whipped, if that is unescapable, would you be objectively obligated to eat that Oreo?
No, because you're not God. I'm only objectively obligated to do things that God says. You're not God, buddy.
Okay, well, your previous justification for why God's prescriptions were objective was that they were inescapable. So since that justification is no longer valid, I would like another one then. What else
Well,
is there that's going to
just
make
real
me
quick to
objectively
clarify. So
obligated?
the idea that it's the inescapable justice is why we ought to obey. That's one of the reasons that we ought to obey. Now, as far as like your analogy with sort of the Oreo and being whipped, right? Let's say instead of you asking me to eat an Oreo, let's say that you were asking me to rape a woman. You said, Hayden, you have to rape a woman, else you will be whipped. And just to make it so it's not you, say it's someone else who's forcing me to do this, because I don't want to, put you in a position where you're acting immoral just because I want to be respectful to you. Okay, but say that it was someone else who was saying, I'm going to whip you unless you rape a woman. I wouldn't rape the woman. I would accept the whipping, or even if someone said that they'll kill me if I don't rape a woman. And the reason is that the person whose justice here, right, the individual forcing me to do this, even though his punishment may be inescapable, he's not the ultimate. Right. And so even if it's inescapable that I'll be punished for that, He's not the one who created me, sustained me, and He's not the one who's actually going to give ultimate justice. Right. So I'm someone who has to obey the ultimate standard of justice, who is God, not this wicked individual on earth. Do you kind of see the difference there and the way that I'm thinking as far as responding to the Oreo question?
I see what you're thinking, but you're really just using these words like ultimate source of justice, and you're not actually giving me a real symmetry breaker in these scenarios. Because I would agree with you. Yeah, if someone asked me to do that, I would I would I would not do that, and I would take that punishment regardless of who they were. And if it's someone like God asking, or saying I should be allowed to own slaves as property for life, I would not do that either. If God asked me to kill my newborn child, I would not, and I would rather go to hell than do that. Right? For me, it's not different, and that's what I'm trying to understand from you is what you think makes God this ultimate objective source of reality.
I guess can I actually
of
so,
morality. Sorry.
sorry, I actually remind me of what you just said, but I did kind of just think of something that goes back to sort of the Oreo analogy. So if you don't mind, I'd kind of want to just go back to that because I feel like I have a better response to that I think you may appreciate. Um, if
Sure.
the person whose justice is inescapable was the same person who blessed me with life, who blessed me with being able to view nature, who blessed me with mercy and salvation through Jesus Christ, was the same person who blessed me with being able to take in all that he has created through my senses and my reasoning, the same person who's given me the ability to reason, the ability to think. If it was that
Hmm.
same person, I would want to obey them, not just because their justice is inescapable, but I would want to obey them out of gratitude for everything that they have given to me. So it's not just that I would want to obey because their justice is inescapable. I'd want to obey because that's a way that I can glorify and serve the person who has blessed me with all these wonderful things in life.
Okay, I understand that. I understand that as a subjective reason you might want to obey someone because you're gracious for what they've provided you. Like I'm very gracious for what my mother has done in my life. She's done a lot for me. But if my mother asked me to whip somebody or sexually assault somebody, I still would not do that. And I don't think the fact that God created the universe or God is very powerful or God's punishments are inescapable, that's still, Hayden, not going to amount to an objective reason I ought to obey God.
What would be an objective reason you ought to obey God?
I would be unsure. I don't think that could exist.
Exactly. See, you've precluded at the outset. You just said, I don't think it could exist. So, even given your premises and your worldview and what you're saying right now, you're saying, I reject at the outset the fact that there could be a God to which I would ultimately have to obey. And in doing so, you've now made yourself God. And I would encourage you to look up Romans 1, verses 18 through the end of the chapter. I think it's 18 to 31, because the way that you're acting right now and everything that you're saying is given it's described explicitly in Romans 1, and that's that you're refusing to give thanks, you're refusing to serve your creator, and instead God has handed you over to your evil desires. You see, it's self-evident to everyone that God has created all of us. And I know we've been talking for a while, so I'm going to kind of try to just bring this to a wrap. The truth is that everyone knows that God exists, and we're without excuse for our suppression of the truth. The difference between me and you is not the lordship of God. It's not God being the ultimate standard. The difference is that I profess it and you suppress it. So I'll let you kind of just go ahead and close sort of with a 60
Sure.
seconds to 2 minute close, and I'll let you get the last word. But I appreciate you talking to me, and feel
Sure.
free to go ahead and bring it on to a close.
So on the incoherence of objective reasons, yeah, I do think it would be impossible to have an objective reason because reasons are fundamentally attributable to that individual. It's going to rely on that own individual's mindset, what their reasons would be. If I am a person who is susceptible to authority, yeah, someone who has the ability to punish me, that would probably be very convincing to me. Or if I'm a very grateful person, yes, if someone helped me a lot in life and they asked me to do something, yeah, I probably would help them. But those are all going to be subjective. That's going to be dependent upon myself. And all the reasons you tried to give me to justify why God's orders are objective, sorry, all those reasons you gave me were still ultimately subjective, Hayden. But I did enjoy the conversation, man. So I'll let you get to the next one.
Imagine calling like God's morality, like the morality that God set, like subjective. Like these atheists, like these people will do anything to justify their sin, do anything to justify their defiance of God. And it's like they think of themselves as like the moral arbiter, like above God. Like they think they could judge God. Wow. Even though Hayden like explained himself pretty well with the whole like he regulated things that he hated, including slavery and divorce. He still regulated that. Like, it's not it's like one ear and out, what it's like one ear and out the other. Like, yeah, but what about this part right here with the slavery, and they cherry pick things from the Bible that they don't even understand. They don't know the context stuff. I think Hayden put it perfectly when he said, well, yes, the reason why is because God did give us everything. He blessed us with this life. He blessed us with this world. Why wouldn't you want to serve God? But these atheists, they only look at the negative aspects of the Bible, or maybe things that they feel that they don't agree with God with. because they want to judge God, like flooding of the earth, or slavery or something like that. And they went to judge God by their own personal morality, which again, like, who are you to think that you know better than God? Good job by Hayden Rodia here, as always. Hopefully, I don't know. Again, I don't know how old this is a kid. He looks like a young kid, like what, 13, 14, 15 years old, 16 years old. It's still early. It's still young enough. I hope he finds his way to God and repent for his sins. But what do you guys think about this? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you liked it. That'll be helping me out a lot. Subscribe to my channel if you really liked it. That'll also help me out a lot. If you want to see more of Hayden Rodia, I got a playlist for you on the screen right here, along with more religious stuff, more debates that I think you guys will enjoy.